Yo, what's going on, everyone? It's Brian and Jim here with Drink a Beer and Play a Game, and today we are going to be checking out XCOM 2.
Yeah, so this got released on everything. Brian played it on the Xbox One. I mainly played it on the Switch via the XCOM 2 collection. This was a donation that actually came in a couple years ago by our buddy Todd, aka Snarcast, and yeah, we have to apologize to him, A, for taking so long, and B, to ourselves for taking so long to play this friggin' game. It is fantastic. We're going to cut all the malarkey and tell you why.
Yeah, I'm extra sad with myself. After going through the original XCOM Enemy Unknown, it was like in my top 20 favorite games of all time. Just never got around to this, and you know what? Thank God we did. I'm really excited for this one.
Yep, and I never played Enemy Unknown or any of the other XCOMs, so this was me coming in fresh. Oh boy.
Let's just jump right into it.
Originally released in 2016, this was developed by Firaxis Games and published by 2K. So, like Brian said, this is the sequel to the reboot of the franchise of Enemy Unknown, and this adds so much to it. But it originally came out on Microsoft Windows, Mac OS, and Linux, followed up by ports to the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, Nintendo Switch, iOS, and Android. So this did eventually get a sequel DLC patch called War of the Chosen, which we're not going to get into today because that's kind of its own game almost with how much they add to that. So we're just talking about the base one for the purpose of this review. The long and short of the story is, after the events of XCOM 1, it goes with the bad ending of that game, and basically XCOM is now an underground resistance organization against the alien force that now rules the world under the name of Advent. And yeah, it just picks up where the last one took off.
The graphics. As Jim said, since this is a follow-up to XCOM Enemy Unknown, there are a lot of improvements, not only with the human soldiers, but with the aliens you're going to be facing. But before we go any further, let's just get something out of the way. Firaxis are the kings of turn-based tactical games. And at this point, with Midnight Suns being released, this XCOM series, you're not going to get any better looking turn-based tacticals out there, and the cinematics just shine. When you get that slowdown, when you're taking your shot, if you have Overwatch, even if you're being attacked, even if something bad is happening to your soldiers, it looks goddamn impressive. But what I really like about this game is the sheer amount of destruction you can do to basically everything. The aliens are inside a house, pull out your grenade launcher and just blast that wall apart. Standing too close to a gas tank, you can make it explode, and they all look so good. If you're dealing with enemies in high positions, same deal, just take out the floor from beneath them. There are just so many options that you don't see in gaming, and we love the amount of detail we have there. But speaking of detail, one of the biggest improvements from the original XCOM is just the level of customization. You can make soldiers with different voices, ethnicities, races. You can put tattoos, you can put camouflage not only on their armor but on their guns. You can mix and match. There is just a shit ton to do if you really want to dive deeper. And then they decide, let's take it one step further. You can even add a backstory to each individual soldier. So there is just so much going on, and I absolutely love little touches to details, like when you add attachments to guns, the guns actually change the way they look. And that is highly overlooked in a lot of other games, but once you upgrade your armor, your soldiers just look absolutely badass. Now, the only bad thing I will say about the game is, I was playing on the Xbox One, Jim was playing on the Switch. There were a lot of moments of slowdown. You can have a lot of enemies on the screen coming in, and let's say you have like 4 of your soldiers on Overwatch and they all trigger at the same time. There's definitely be some stuttering and slowdown, and for me with the Xbox One, if I cause too many explosions, I literally crashed the game a few times. Jim didn't have that experience, but like I said, using the Xbox One, I don't know. I think that was a common issue. I'm not so sure if it was the same on the PC, but putting that aside, it didn't stop me from appreciating how great this game looked. And the last thing I'll mention is I was a sucker for even these cutscenes, like when the scientist is cutting open all the alien autopsies. All these little touches made just boring text-based like do task, and it really got you more involved with the story. So when it comes to scores, I gave it an 8, Jim gave it a 7. When it comes to beer, I'm just going to add 1 for those random bugs that I encountered when I played.
The sound. You know what? This is a really solid package. So you can kind of tell that for a game just as big and ridiculous as this is, they had to, not to say cut corners, but they had to put their attention in certain spots. And the sound is good. I just wish there was more of it. So there's voice acting in the game, and it's all well done, really. Like from the newscasters in the opening credits to, you know, your main commander on the ship and all the other people who talk during the course of the game, to the head enemy bad guy with his southern drawl. And even once you get to, well, I shouldn't even say spoiler for a 6-year-old game or whatever, but there's, you know, these ancient creatures at the end of it, like the alien spirits and crap like that, and they're just like, they sound really good and like high and mighty and crap. So it's really well performed. And then the sound effects are good, like the explosions are huge, the guns all sound different as they're firing, and those sound good too. The aliens, you kind of, for the most part, get the generic grunts, but at least all of them, they talk in their alien grunt language when they're talking to each other, so...
Jim, can I tell you one of my favorite parts of the sound?
Go on.
When you kill those sons of bitches and you hear them scream.
Yeah, I do love that.
You know what it's time for, Jim? Something we haven't done in a little while.
Is it a montage?
Little mini montage of just alien screams. You bastards.
I mean, we really do like the sound in this game, and the music's good too. You don't get a ton of tracks, and you do get one real main theme throughout. I do like the touch, though, that as you're flying in at the end of a mission, the theme sounds, it's composed differently depending on how well you did in the mission. So, you know, if you had like a perfect run, like it's really loud, it's super bombastic, and if you had a terrible run where like half your squad dies and you barely escaped, it's real low and somber, but still keeping the same basic form. So I love little touches like that. But yeah, I mean, for what you get, it's really well done. You just don't get enough variety in our opinion, so we both gave it 7s. But when it comes to beer, I'm just going to add 1 beer for the lack of variety, really.
The control. Now, right off the bat, this is a turn-based tactical game, so control you would think is going to be perfect, and for the most part, it is, but we do have a few issues with it. Now, the generic setup for any time you're going on a mission, for anyone who hasn't played this game, the first phase is going to be moving your soldiers, and depending on how many actions you have left, you may be able to set them up in Overwatch, or you may be able to attack. The movement is very easy, it's grid-based, and you are allowed to change levels between, you know, if there's an upper floor or a roof you can climb on, and that's easy enough to navigate with the D-pad. And then once you set up your soldier, you have a lot of options, especially towards the end game, and Jim will dive into this a little deeper, but when you get into some of the psi powers, or if you have additional explosives, you just have a lot at your arsenal, and you can pull up your abilities with the RT trigger. And this is where it can get a little confusing, because I'll be honest, maybe I was drinking too much beer. I don't know. But sometimes when I meant to have my soldier attack, I accidentally would hit Overwatch, and there's no reversing that decision. So I would lock him into that. Or sometimes I would accidentally end a turn for a soldier just because I hit the button. Not that I want more prompts, but it would have been nice to have that in there. But as I said, I know it's minor complaints. Really, the control is very well done. I just felt that sometimes navigating the menus and all the options you had for the characters could be a little clunky, and even moving around the headquarters, Sometimes that was a little bit confusing, but that's more of the mechanics of how it was laid out, not so much the control. So, when it comes to scores, I gave it an 8, Jim gave it a 9. As I said, it's as close to perfect as it can be. Maybe some of my issues were actually just still bugs because of the graphical errors. Either way, I'm not adding beers. You're not going to have an issue with this game because of control.
The gameplay. Okay, before I get into anything else, we got to talk about the glitches, because we are a lot of years since release, and this game can still be a bit of a glitchy pain in the ass. There's going to be times where you can't really see what you're doing. The camera will be randomly behind you as you're doing actions and stuff like that, obscuring your vision. If you land the wrong way sometimes, you'll either be considered captured or unconscious, and then for whatever reason, your other characters who should be able to revive you or resuscitate you, they can't. So there's a lot of times where you're going to be dealing with a lot of frustrating bullcrap. So just keep that in mind. It does run a lot better than it did at launch. Apparently it ran terribly at launch. But just keep in mind, if you get around to playing this and you experience glitches, it happens to all of us. With that being said, like we said, this is a turn-based tactical game. So when you cut it all down to its core, it's basically you're taking turns, you get 2 turns per character, and you go against the enemy and you try to win and survive. And this is one of those lovely tactical games that has permadeath. And permadeath will be your undoing, almost. Because depending on how much you play, you're going to be tempted to restart from an earlier save, and you're going to feel dirty about it, but you're going to wind up doing it a lot. Because this game, you really need to keep players around to level them up, to build them up, to get different classes, and to get all these different abilities. So, as you progress through the game, you all start off as basic soldiers, any of your guys. And then, as it progresses, you can unlock one of 5 major types. So you can be the Ranger class, which is the more stealthy guy. They have blade weapons, more shotgun types, and they're good like reconnaissance scout types. You have the specialists, who are going to be your field medics and hackers. So they have the little gremlin robots who follow them. They don't have the best arsenal in the world, but you can upgrade to either be the generic support guys, basically. However you want to do that. Sharpshooters, they're your snipers. They're basically going to be the most powerful guys on your team. And then there's the grenadiers. So they're the grenaders. They have the heaviest artillery. They can shred the armor of your enemies. They can blow up stuff. They are really useful. And then you have your PSYOP guys, who I didn't even have any in my final run that I beat the game with. I know Brian used them.
Yeah, I was going to say, first run through I did, I never used them either. Once I did, they are basically, when you get tired of dealing with sectoids who take over your people, this is the mechanic in the game that I was like, holy shit, if I ever replay this, I'm going to go there first, because I want to test out playing as the enemy. You take control of people, or you completely stun them, or you just give them a goddamn blast. They're like your superheroes with no armor, and it really changes the dynamic of your team once you get one of those guys on there.
For sure. And you need to build the PSYOP lab in order to start training them, and you need to have some rookies there. So in order to use them, you have to plan around actually making them. So there's a little more strategy right there. And speaking of space, you need to plan every step ahead. Not just in the actual combat during missions, but in the overworld and in how you build your base on the Avenger. So you're not in a base anymore. You're in a flying fortress, basically, called the Avenger, and it's kind of like the base from XCOM Enemy Unknown. So you can clear out space, and you can build your resistance comms, which you use to talk to other, resistance forces. You can build different labs and power supplies and engineering bays, and the PSYOPs lab we talked about, and different research things, and dark research, and all different things to progress the story. Different ways to automatically train rookies so you don't have to go through those opening levels of trying to just level them up to have their classes. It's going to take you a while before you get the hang of how you should strategize building everything, on top of doing research on the side, and on top of doing stuff in engineering and using your supplies and intel to build resources to use for your characters. And then you have the overworld map, which is called the geospace, where you fly around and that's the overworld. And that's where you have to go to different continents and make contacts and pick which missions you're going to. And as that's going on, then the Advent are starting their Avatar project, which is basically the doomsday counter of the game, where That's the end condition. If the avatar counter goes all the way down, it's game over, you're donezo. While that's going down, you can choose your missions to either try and sabotage them, to turn the counter back. And there's also the thing of where, as you're doing your other missions through the game, some that can be optional, the Avatar Project will increase in some ways depending on which ones you do. So you have to really plan every single thing that you're going into in this game. On top of all the optional missions outside, because there's 3 types of missions. There's the required storyline missions, there's the optional side missions that kind of progress the story in different ways, but also add new things, like the Spark Robot, who's so goddamn useful once you get to use him. But I do gotta say about the Spark Robot, so Brian, he just had the straight up base game. He didn't even have a collection that included the original game, so he never got around to even seeing the Spark Robot. Whereas I played vanilla XCOM 2, but through the XCOM collection, so maybe they just threw in an eventual DLC in there for that mission. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I don't know the timeline. Or then there's also the other side missions that can give you the super side bosses, like the Viper King, and then the upgraded behemoths and crap like that, who can be recurring enemies who will teleport out once they get hurt if you don't kill them in time. So then there's even that headache if you want to deal with it. Besides all the storyline missions, which get harder and harder. And speaking of these missions, we already touched on it, but everything is procedurally generated. So, Enemy Unknown, you could really plan out every mission because it was going to be the same thing every time. Here, not the case. Good luck. So Brian talked about already, there's a concealment system for a lot of missions where you can really try and spread yourself out and take your pop shots and try to get easy, quick kills for tactical advantages. But if you're 2 grouped together, if you shoot with one guy, everyone gets revealed, and then you're off to the races kind of deal. And then there's all the guerrilla tactics kind of missions that are on timers. So in XCOM Enemy Unknown, you could just wait for the enemies to come to you. Not the case here. You have to be aggressive or you're going to time out and lose missions left and right. And this is especially a pain in the ass when you're low level because your guys are so weak that you're just going to be throwing yourself almost into the fire because you're trying to complete the missions. So you're going to lose a guy who you've been working on and just have that frustration. Besides the fact that you have the percentages of hits. Just bare bones percentages. And guess what? No percentages saved. Unless it says 100, it could say 95%. You will miss. And you will scream. And there is no pain worse than losing a freaking guy, especially a high-level one that you've been working on the entire time. And then you also have your escort missions, your rescue missions, your supply drop missions where you have to try and make sure that the enemy doesn't kill all of your supplies. There's just so much variety during the course of this game. It's insane. So we could just keep going on and on and on and on and on and on and on. There's so much to cover in this game. It's like a perfect, fully immersive tactical experience. And even crazier, we're not going to talk about it really this game, but the War of the Chosen DLC adds, if you're a newbie coming into XCOM 2 like me, you're overwhelmed until you get the hang of it. You have to lose runs. You have to put in time and die before you understand how you need to strategize everything and how to approach these fights. And then War of the Chosen, for as different as Never Playing to XCOM 2 is, XCOM 2 to War of the Chosen is. They add that much to it. It's insane. But even at this base level, Brian gave it a 9 and I gave it a 10. Like, I had an absolute blast with this game. It can at the same time be the most frustrating and most satisfying experience in the world. And when it comes to beer, none. You don't need any. No. One, you have to put a lot of time and you're going to get thirsty.
The originality. Well, Jim already covered the fact that this game offered a lot more than Enemy Unknown, and that is where it gets all the points from us. The first thing that is most noticeable, as Jim mentioned, you do have that concealment mechanic, which in the first game, it was never a thing. So you will treat certain missions a little bit differently. You're going to have to be a lot more strategic right up front. And, if you're lucky, maybe you can take out a couple waves of enemies before you're fully revealed. But that was something we never experienced before. In addition, you can now loot corpses, and it's very random, and you can actually upgrade certain characters to make it happen a little bit more frequently, but it was something you never saw before, and this loot will reveal either weapon attachments or some very important data that you can analyze, which will just help you in later stages of the game. And the next one is a really nice feature for those of you who refuse to reload at an earlier stage, which is you can call for extraction at any time in the game. You didn't have that option before, so yes, you may lose the mission, but you won't lose your soldiers. So if you're just taking fire and you say, screw it, you know what, let's get out of here, you have that ability. And speaking of abilities, as Jim mentioned, you have the Ranger, who now has the melee abilities, which you can upgrade with some really crazy, like, alien plasma weapons. It's just another nice little feature that you didn't have previously. And this is probably the only surefire thing, as Jim said, be safe hearing me say this, you're almost always going to hit that. I have missed a goddamn melee, and it's cost me dearly.
Poor Bri, the surprise guys who block your melee and hit your back for even worse damage.
Yeah, the counter guys make you rethink doing it altogether. But speaking of guys, the amount of new aliens added to this game are absolutely insane, and their abilities, every time you get comfortable, like in a little groove, like, oh man, sectoids are annoying because they take over your mind. Then you get Vipers who goddamn strangle you. Then you get the faceless assholes who just transform from regular citizens and come over and just swipe you to death. There are just so many varieties of aliens that you really need to learn and adapt as quickly as possible. One strategy you're all going to do, which is probably you'll tiptoe a little bit forward, set everyone in Overwatch, clear an area, move forward again, because you never want to send anyone too far forward because you'll probably get acid bombed by this asshole. Or you just never know what you're going to run into in any given mission until you're really at the end of the game. And then finally, the only other things they really added were the ability to carry soldiers, which is nice because you can retain some of their equipment if you take them to the extraction point, or if they're knocked out or bleeding out, you can actually have them resuscitated when the mission is over. And the final piece, which Jim already mentioned, that countdown clock, that was a goddamn mean mechanic. This game was already tough. They added that on top of it. Now, granted, even if you hit the final timer, you still have like a month to set it back. But it's just, it's a stressful thing when you're playing this game.
And in a way, you kind of want to let it get to that final countdown, because if you do a sabotage mission at that point successfully, it sets it back way more than just a normal sabotage would. So there's strategy there too.
So with all that being said, we both gave it 7s. Listen, this is not a brand new game, but as I just said, it made so many features unique for the series, we couldn't deny it. When it comes to beer, I'm not adding any. I was so goddamn impressed, and to Jim's point, if you go from this to War of the Chosen, then it's going to feel like a whole new game again. So do yourself a favor, play the base game first, then get the DLC, and you'll treat yourself twice.
Alright, for playability, we've talked enough so I can keep this pretty quick. So, the game is completely procedurally generated, so every run will be different. You have all your different character classes, and you have 2 different types of things to choose from for each character, so you can completely outfit your characters in a different way every time you play. There's an online multiplayer mode, which I know on Windows it's down now, like they got rid of it, but I think on console you can still do it. We didn't really spend time with it. And there's a big modding community on Steam for it, for the Steam version of the game. And then there's the DLC. And, I mean, you do get 2 endings, but really it just comes down to how, thanks to the procedural generation, even if you save a level at the very beginning that you start and close it out, if you go back into it, the map will be different from how you previously saved it. That's how in-depth the procedural generation goes here. Oh, and let's not forget, once you beat the game, then there's goddamn Iron Mode, where you can't save at all. It overwrites after every single decision you make, so every decision is final for the most hardcore of hardcore strategy fans. So, Brian gave it a 9, and I gave it a 10. There is just so much to go back to in this, and no playthrough will ever be the same. And when it comes to beer, again, 1 beer for being thirsty.
Overall, this game is amazing. As I said before, XCOM Enemy Unknown was already in my top 20. This game took that format and just made it that much better. The best way to describe this game is a experience, because you're never going to feel more frustrated or accomplished at the same exact time. And honestly, getting through this game, it's a marathon. It's not a short race. You got to plan out all your steps. But my God, is it so fun to go through.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, I never played Enemy Unknown. I never played the original XCOMs, so I was completely fresh to this series. I really can't tell you the last time a game took me by surprise like this. I was overwhelmed at first, completely overwhelmed. It took me a while to get into the swing of it. But once I did, I haven't had a game have its hooks in me like this in so friggin' long. I wound up putting about 80 hours into it, which I have not done, and I cannot tell you how long for any game. So, it's a game I legitimately did not want to put down. And I lost so much sleep because it also has that just one more level feel, too. Mm-hmm. You're like, oh, I could probably beat this rescue mission fast. No. Or I could probably do this. And then next thing I know, it's like 2 a.m. And I'm like, oh, shit, I have work in 3 hours. So, yeah, this is a game you have to plan time for. It's not a pick up and play in the most basic sense of the word. But it is such a satisfying, all-encompassing experience. Even besides staying up late playing it, I lost sleep thinking about it. Yep. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't fall asleep because I just kept thinking of strategy.
Oh man, I need to plan this building and this and that. Or what if I did it this way? This game will haunt you with the what ifs. Oh man, had I gone and done this mission and said that, what if this character didn't die? That's what a great game does. And like Jim just said, honestly, if you go through and beat the game in one playthrough, that's crazy. Because both of us, we got to a midway point. We said, you know what? Restart or you completely lose. You got to get your bearings, understand what's going on with the game, and you do need to lose to kind of truly appreciate and understand what the planning means. And even then, in the playthrough you're going to do that you win, it's still going to take some time. So if you're someone who's impatient, it may not be the game for you, but I strongly suggest
you will learn patience. You don't have a choice.
You have to try this game. It's as recommended of any game we've ever done. So when it comes to scores, I gave it a 9. Jim gave it a 10. When we round all of our scores together, it comes out to an 8.7, which once again for us, it might as well be a 10. This is really close to perfect. Does it have a few bugs and glitches? Absolutely. By the end of the game, are you kind of steamrolling and you're going through the same missions? Sure. But you feel so... I don't even know the word.
I love the feeling of an enemy that first debuts and you're like, oh shit, what's this? I'm scared of this thing. I'm avoiding it. To eventually seeing it and being like,
yeah, the laughability of it, especially if you have a multi-sniper team and one of those goddamn Vipers pops its head, it's like, I dare you to get my line of sight right now. There is no better feeling, of coming back. And you know what? You can even visit the little bar in your command center, see all your fallen soldiers in a little memorial. And you know what? Every time you go out on those missions, you'll appreciate it. So we can't recommend the game enough. Todd, once again, it's on us that we took so long to get to it. We know it's an amazing game. Thank you so much for sending it our way and requesting it. And if you guys have never played it, honestly, you can jump right to 2. You don't even need to start with Enemy Unknown.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I did.
Thank you guys. Cheers.
Yep. Have a good night.
When it comes to beer pairing, I had to give such a special game a really special beer, so I decided to go with the Tired Hands Brewing Company's Alien Church. This is their flagship New England style IPA, and honestly, it's probably one of the best, if not the best, hazy IPAs I've ever had. Coming in at 7%, there's a reason anyone who's tried this beer can't stop talking about it. And much like this game, the two of these will pair very well together. Now, it is not beginner friendly, so if you don't like IPAs, it's probably not going to be your style, but if you're someone who can stick with it, you're going to find a really enjoyable experience. So if you're lucky, get as many of these as you can, sit back and enjoy yourself. Remember to drink your beers and play your games responsibly.